What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's some of my early thoughts ahead of the Game Week 17 deadline. So I'm going to go through some key players that are worth talking about and then go through some of my notes from the weekend as well. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. Let's get into it. So let's start with Diallo, who's now gone up to 5.2 million following that goal and assist against Man City yesterday. And the level of returns he's had since Amorim took over have been pretty impressive. So the first game was Ipswich away in Game Week 12. He's had 5 assists and 1 goal since then, so 6 attacking returns in 4 starts, which is pretty nice. I wouldn't necessarily expect that level of returns to continue, but at 5.2 million, it doesn't necessarily need to. He's in there as a value player that's an 8th attacker that enables you to spend funds elsewhere. I think you could maybe play him as a permanent option, but I still prefer to have him as an 8th attacker that you use as part of a rotation or when someone gets benched or something like that. The other thing that is making me a bit more keen on him now than maybe I was when Amorim first came in is we've got a few games to go off in terms of which players are looking important. And in the league, at least, since that Ipswich game, he started 4 out of 5 and played 90 minutes every single time. The only game he didn't start was Arsenal away, and he came on at half-time and played 45 minutes. So whether it's going to be as a wing-back or whether it's going to be in the front 3 behind the number 9, Ahmad looks pretty important right now. And I think the fact that Rashford and Garnacho were left out of the squad just boosts his minutes even more. Now, I suspect those 2 players will be back in and around the squad very soon. I don't think they're going to be permanently left out, but I think it shows that Diallo is quite high up in the pecking order. In terms of underlying numbers, 0.19 expected goals per 90, 0.14 expected assists. Nothing special, but again, he's a very cheap midfielder at 5.2. You've got to set your expectations, and the fixtures are pretty good. Bournemouth at home, Wolves away, Newcastle at home next 3. Liverpool away in 20 is a bit tougher, but then it's Southampton at home, Brighton at home. So you've got 4 home games in the next 6, and one of the away games is Wolves away. Now, they'll have a new manager, but I don't think it's anything to worry about. So if you're looking to spend this kind of money on a midfielder, Amad Diallo's right up there. You could maybe look at Enzo instead. Chelsea's fixtures are very good. He's slightly cheaper as well. But I think if you're going to get games with Amad Diallo in that front 3, he's probably the one that I would look at between the 2. But either kind of works if you're looking at that price. I still think if you've got someone like Morgan Rogers, I wouldn't be in a rush to get rid of him. But if we're talking about buying him at 5.4, he has got City at home next, then Newcastle away, also plays Arsenal away in 22, and he's on 4 yellow cards. So he's perfectly reasonable to keep, but I'm not sure I'd necessarily be buying him right now ahead of maybe Ahmad and Enzo that got the fixtures right in front of them and no yellow card worries. So big score for Lewis Hall at the weekend, a 15-pointer following a clean sheet, 2 assists and 3 bonus points. One of the assists was a little bit controversial, but I think going by FPL rules, it was probably correctly given. Lots of people have bought him in. He's gone up to 4.6 million. Is it still worth adding him to your squad before Ipswich away? I think the ideal window to get him was probably last week before that Leicester game, but I don't mind him this week. Ipswich away, Villa at home on paper. Not perfect fixtures, but not terrible either. And we know he's got that attacking potential on top. I think when you look at the next 6 game weeks as a whole, the best fixture Newcastle have is probably 21 against Wolves at home. And having to play United away and Spurs away in 19 and 20 is not ideal. But if you need someone to come in and play the next 2 games, Lewis Hall looks pretty good. And if you can then bench him for the United and Spurs game, even better. And some people might point to the fact that before the Leicester game, it was a stream of 1 and 2 pointers. So Lewis Hall got a 1-pointer against Brentford, 1-pointer against Liverpool, 2 against Palace, 1 against West Ham, 2 against Forest. But you could maybe say he was a little bit unlucky not to get more points. Like against West Ham, for example, he put up 0.33 expected goal involvement. And when you look at their defence, against Forest, 0.63 expected goals conceded. Against West Ham, 0.91. Against Brentford, where they conceded 4 goals, it was 0.57. Now, I don't think the Newcastle defence is perfect by any means. Like against Crystal Palace, they conceded 1.76. But on the whole, there have been some games where they've had some decent defensive performances and not quite got the clean sheets. So I think we might see a few more going forward. So I think for the next 2, he's actually not that bad. But if you need to bring him in and play him for the next 4 as a whole, with those 2 away games against United and Spurs, I'd probably look to side with avoiding him. In terms of his place in the team, he's playing so well and such an attacking threat as well. I don't see Eddie Howe dropping him anytime soon. The only slight worry would be if Botman comes back and Dan Burn gets pushed to left back. But Dan Burn just cannot do what Lewis Hall does in terms of that attacking threat. So I'm not sure that's a guarantee, but it's definitely a possibility. But until we see Botman get regular minutes, I don't think that's a concern. So talking of cheap defenders, Anthony Robinson is also really popular this week. Like Lewis Hall, he put up 2 assists at the weekend. Didn't get a clean sheet, but to be fair, he was playing against Liverpool. And I think if you can cover him for that Chelsea away game in game week 18, he is the cheap defender under 5 million to buy this week, if you can afford the 4.8 million price tag. He's a little bit more expensive than Lewis Hall, but over the next 6 game weeks, I think the fixtures are much better for Fulham. So Southampton at home in 17, Chelsea away in 18, then it's Bournemouth at home, Ipswich at home, West Ham away, Leicester away. I think you could argue that Lewis Hall is better for 17 and 18, but over the next 6 weeks, it's definitely Fulham over Newcastle for me. So I think Robinson looks pretty good. In terms of the defensive data, if you look at the expected goals conceded column on Hub, Arsenal-Liverpool top 2 as you might expect, then Nottingham Forest, then Bournemouth, then Villa, interestingly, and then Fulham and Newcastle. So Fulham and Newcastle both in and around the top 6-7 teams defensively so far this season. Well worth looking at. The price tag is nice, gives you a cheap enabling option to spend money elsewhere. And I think you can just play him most weeks, even to the point that if you had to play him in 18, I still think he's worth it because of all the fixtures around it. So he was who I would get now. If I was buying later on around game week 19, I might look at someone like Munoz instead at Crystal Palace. But because he picked up his 5th yellow yesterday and he's got Arsenal at home next anyway, even if he wasn't suspended, I don't think this is the window to buy him. So Robinson looks pretty good. The only thing to keep an eye out for in the press conferences this week is what Marco Silva says about Joachim Andersen, because he's only 4.2 million. Now, I do think Robinson probably has slightly better attacking threat, but if Anderson was fully fit, I would definitely spend 0.6 less to still target those same fixtures. But it is going to be a bit of a risk. Even if Silva says he's available, he has been out for a few matches now. Game week 12 was the last time he played. But I think in the future, if you're not buying a Fulham defender this week, you're leaving it till 19 or 20, Anderson's a good value option. But for the attacking threat, fully fit, starts every single game right now, Robinson is definitely the one. So another Newcastle player that did well this week is Alexander Isak. 1 goal, 1 assist against Leicester, which now takes him to 7 goals, 4 assists for the season. So 11 attacking returns in 14 starts, which is decent enough. And I think right now he's probably one of the best forwards to own in FPL. If I was wildcarding this week, he'd be one of the first names going into that squad. And the nice thing about him versus, say, a Lewis Hall as a defender is the fixture run doesn't look as bad. Like Ipswich away, Villa at home, Man United away, Spurs away. Could be better, right, than the 3 away games in the next 4. But you're not worried about most of those matches. Then you've got Wolves at home and Bournemouth at home. So decent enough fixtures over the next 6. Absolutely nailed. Hopefully he can continue playing 90 minutes every week with the fixture congestion. The underlying stats are great. He's on penalties. There's really no negatives to say about Isak, to the point that before I started recording, I was thinking this week I'll probably get some questions. Should I sell this forward to Isak? I think in almost every case the answer is that Isak is the better option. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to sell all your forwards. I might keep the 3 that I've got, but Isak is probably an upgrade on all of them. Even with like Haaland playing against Villa, okay, Haaland's still pretty great as an FPL pick, but Isak just frees up so much money that I would rather have Isak than Haaland right now. So he looks great. The only thing I would maybe say to be a little bit cautious of is Newcastle's upcoming fixtures. They have to play Brentford at home in the Carabao Cup quarter-final before they play Ipswich at the weekend. So they've just played on Saturday, they're playing on Wednesday, then they're playing on Saturday again. And then the Villa game in game week 18 is on Thursday. So the gap between matches is not that bad, but I think there's a very good chance that Isak will start that game against Brentford. It gives Newcastle a chance to get into a semi-final, and obviously Brentford are not pushover. So I don't see like Osula or someone like that playing instead of Isak in a game like that. So I would just be a bit careful about bringing him in early, because if he picks up a knock in that game and you've transferred him in early, that's going to be a little bit frustrating. So if you've already done it, don't worry about it. But if you can wait and you're not going to be priced out if he goes up again, I think you should wait. But either way, if he's fit for that game week 17 match against Ipswich, he's a brilliant option to bring in this week. So Diogo Jota was back for Liverpool at the weekend, and as we've come to expect from him, when he gets a chance, he often scores. 11 minutes off the bench against Fulham, scores the equaliser to make it 2-2. And there's going to be interest in him moving forward from an FPL perspective, because he's a massive differential, and they've got Leicester at home in game week 18. All I would say with Jota is be cautious with him. He's been out for a little while. He doesn't have the greatest injury record either. It's not necessarily that he's always out for ages, but he always seems to pick up some kind of knock. And he hasn't played a 90-minute match since game week 7, which was before the second international break. So he's been out for a little while. I would expect Liverpool to be cautious with him over the next few weeks, especially when there's fixture congestion. He's just not going to come in and start all these games. And before the Spurs away game, they've got a Carabao Cup match. So if he's going to start one of the next 2 for Liverpool, it's probably that Carabao Cup match, which we'll know before the deadline, which means he's likely to be benched for Spurs. And then he could play against Leicester. But if he does, I would then expect him to be potentially benched against West Ham. So I think the most you're getting out of Jota is 1 start in the next 3 Premier League matches. I might be wrong about that. He might get 2. But I think it's more likely he only gets 1. Now, if it's against Leicester, that could be a big enough score to warrant the punt, but there's quite a few other good options around that price. Anthony Gordon, for example, Jared Bowen. If you've got Mbeumo and Fernandes, etc., they look good for game week 17, so no need to move them on for Jota. I would just be cautious. And also, if you look at the gaps between games, if he doesn't start Spurs, then Leicester, like I said, does probably look pretty good for a start. But then it's 3 days later to West Ham. I think Leicester at home is the most you're going to get out of him. And also, as bad as Nunez has been, which means Jota through the middle is going to be what Slot wants to do more often than not, Gakpo and Diaz have started quite a lot as left wing and through the middle, mostly because Jota's been out and Nunez hasn't been great, but it is another option that Slot has where he doesn't have to rush Jota back. So I think he is potentially great if he can stay fit. I think if he is available and we get closer to that double that's potentially going to happen in 24, he'll have a lot of interest because his ownership won't shoot up. There is no way I would be bringing him in this week. We can reassess before that Leicester game, but I'd want to see how many minutes he gets in the Carabao Cup and against Spurs before I even took a chance on him. So I'm just going to go through some notes from the weekend. As always, I'll probably cover some of this stuff in more detail later on in the week. Saka now has 5 blanks in the last 7 game weeks. I've seen a couple of people start to ask me about whether or not it's worth selling him. I wouldn't spend any time thinking about it. He's got Palace away this week and Ipswich at home in game week 18. You shouldn't kid yourself that you're going to transfer him out before that Ipswich game in particular. So just hold on to him. I think when he got 31 points in 2 game weeks not too long ago, I felt a little bit unlucky as a non-owner. But now as a non-owner, I feel very lucky that he hasn't got more returns. They will come. You're not selling him. Maybe in the future it might be worth it to spread money around. But right now I think he's still great for the next 2. Raul Jimenez early sub before the 70th minute. Muniz another goal off the bench as well. Some people might actually be looking at bringing in Raul Jimenez this week because he's only 5.5. And as a cheap value forward, he's decent. Southampton at home is good. I still think he's first choice. You cannot guarantee that he's going to start every game. But I think with Fulham's fixtures coming up, he's still a decent enough option. Cunha, lots of questions about possible suspension given what happened in that game at the weekend. At the time of recording, we don't have any more information on it. So it's not a guarantee that he will get suspended. If he does, we'll probably hear about it before the deadline. So I would just hold your horses on Cunha. But I think after this week, he's probably someone that you can look to let go of anyway. Watkins benched. That was always a possibility. He picked up a bit of a knock. But also, I just don't think Villa need to risk him when they've got Duran. And he scored again as well. I think it was 2-1 for Aston Villa. I think Forest beat them, didn't they? Got to try and remember because I was out for most of the weekend. Yeah, 2-1, but Duran scored again. So I just think at any point over the next few weeks where there's a bit of fixture congestion, if Watkins isn't 100%, they just don't need to risk him. So I just don't think he's worth the money right now. Vardiol conceded twice to Man United, but got another goal. That's now 4 for the season. He's a genuine goal threat in that Man City team. Ideally, I'd like to see him playing as a left-back going forward rather than a left centre-back. But there is genuine attacking threat there. And from game week 18 onwards, the fixtures are pretty good. So if you've got him, you can maybe keep hold of him. But I still think Liverpool and Arsenal defenders are better going forward. Eze and Mateta, hooked before 60 minutes. A little bit of a worry. But let's see what happens over the next couple of game weeks. The time to bring Palace players in is probably game week 19 before Southampton at home. So we can get a few more games seeing how many minutes certain players get, then make a decision whether any of them are worth buying. But that does worry me a little bit, especially when Sarr did so well and obviously got the returns but also played a bit more game time. I still think Eze will be the one to go for midfield-wise. but I want to see a bit more before I make that decision. I just don't think you need to rush them in before Arsenal. Tosin played for Chelsea. He's only 4.2 million. I think Maresca said before the game that Badiashile, they're not sure how long he's going to be out for. So it looks to me that Colwill is first choice, absolutely, like 100% nailed on. Then it's probably Badiashile. But if he's going to be out, then Tosin at 4.2 million, potentially an option. But I think if Badiashile is not out for any kind of length of time, you just pay the 4.6 for Colwill and just have that player that's always going to be in the team, even when Fofana is back. Brennan Johnson benched again. That is now twice in, let me just double check here, like 5 game weeks, I think. So he's benched against Southampton, came on at half time, and was benched against Man City back in game week 12. So yeah, 2 benchings in the last 5 weeks. Only played 52 minutes against Chelsea as well. I don't think he's a terrible option moving forward. I still think he'll start more often than not, and Spurs fixtures aren't that bad after Liverpool. But I think if you've got the spare transfer to move into someone else, that is definitely something you could consider. If you enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button. Check out Fantasy Football Hub using the links in the description below. And rate 5 stars if you listen on podcasts as well. I'll be back tomorrow for transfer tips, so I'll catch you then.